Starting OSPF, and one of the most important thing to understand is that each router in OSPF area they operate needs to have unique identifier. It's a 4 bytes with a dot as a delimiting character, so their IDs look like IP addresses, and they have to be unique. Now, because of that, there's a predefined process how the router in OSPF selects its own ID. So the first thing it does, it checks the manual command. There's a router ID command. If that one is typed in first before the router is discovered, it becomes its ID. Once the router is already discovered and introduces itself with a different ID than the router ID command specifies, the clearing of the process has to take place. If there is no router ID command, the system prefers the highest IP address of a loopback interface if one exists. If one doesn't exist, it prefers the highest IP address of the physical interface. Now, the interfaces have to be up for this to take place. Now, let's just a quick exercise of what I just said. I'm gonna go global config mode, and first I'll go alias exec. I will create alias for my command I use very often. The alias is this shortcut, which will stand for show IP interface brief, maybe exclude unassigned. So if I do SIB now, it displays the interfaces. Now, it's important to understand that, because right now, if I start my process here, the highest IP address, there's no loopback. So if I start my process OSPF, and by the way, the number is in the range between 165,535, it's locally significant, so it doesn't have to match on my neighbors, but for consistency's sake, I prefer to use always the same number. So let's go for 1, for instance. This starts the routing process. The OSPF is now enabled, and it already has ID. Since there is no manual command, this will be the command followed by 4 bytes. If there is no manual command and there is no loopback, my ID will be this address. So because it is the highest IP address of a physical interface. So if I do show IP OSPF and maybe focus on just ID, this is my ID, OSPF process 1 with ID 10.145.4. Since I have not been discovered by anyone just yet, so I haven't introduced my ID to anyone, there's no neighbor relationship built, I can easily change that, override that with my router ID commands. So if I make it, let's say 4.4.4.4, now this is going to be my ID. If I remove this command, however, and once the process started, I create a loopback interface, let's say with the same 4.4.4. So right now is 10.1.45.4. Now loopback is a little bit too late to the party. So if I go L0 and IP address 4.4.4.4 with the mask /32. Now I do have loopback interface, but since the process was already started, it's not going to change its ID now. It's still 10.145.4. If, however, I remove the process, and now when the loopback is configured, if I recreated it, now my ID is going to be 4.4.4.4. One last thing is that this loopback obviously has to be up and running. Let's just say, for the argument's sake, there's router OSPF1. Let's remove that process. I'm going to shut down all the interfaces. Interface E0045. Let's just say shut and 0, 1, 2, shut and 1, 3, shut and loopback 0, shut. So currently no interface is up and running. What happens? Can I start a process? If I do that, let's see what happens. The system says I cannot allocate unique router ID and cannot start. Obviously, if I bring any of those interfaces, I'll start with loopback maybe. No shut. The process will start, and I will have now do show IP protocols. OSPF is running, and do show IP OSPF include ID. It is gonna be the loopback 4.4.4.4. In the next video, I will focus on enabling router OSPF between two routers and how we can do this, because there's two ways of doing this.